about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Do we have on now? Okay. Today, we are to have Paul Jacob call in. He's the president of Citizens in Charge, and I hear phone ringing in my ear. Why is a phone ringing in my ear? Okay, the phone went away. Okay. Right. Paul Jacobs is the president of Citizens in Charge, a nonpartisan group working to protect and expand the initiative rights of Americans. In addition to his many activities fostering individual liberty, Paul hosts Common Sense, an online and print opinion commentary which reaches tens of thousands of online readers and email subscribers, of which I am one. His writings have been featured in USA Today as well as most major news broadcasts. Okay. During our broadcast, please feel free to call in with your questions or comments. 646-652-4620. I'll repeat, 646-652-4620. It is now my pleasure to present our guest, Paul Jacob.
Joe, very good to see you.
Paul, thank you. I had a mini heart attack because I thought maybe you were sick again. I had to make up a program for 1 hour. So how are you doing? How are you feeling now?
I'm doing better, feeling better, and I didn't want to, I think it's a growth thing when you're thrown out there with no program and you have to make it up on the fly, but I don't want you to grow too fast.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to grow anymore. Okay. Well, we expect you to call in a little earlier, so we started to panic real quickly, 10 minutes before the hour when we didn't hear from you. Well, I'm glad you're here. That's the important thing. Well, Paul, I understand that you are now petitioning for an initiative process in which to change the voting system that we have here in the United States. Could you tell us something about it?
Well, I'm very supportive of an initiative in Maine that would allow ranked choice voting. And that's a process whereby not only do you get to say, hey, I want candidate A to win, but you can say if candidate A doesn't win my first choice, here's who my second choice is. Here's who my third choice is. And when you have a multi-candidate field, instead of allowing somebody to win with 32% of the vote or 27% of the vote, you've got to get to a majority. And so if you have three candidates and someone has 40% and someone else has 35% and someone else has 25%, candidate C, let's say, with 25% drops off, and the folks who wanted that candidate to win get to make their second choice, so that there's a consensus winner who has a majority of support. Might not be everybody's first choice. And of course, obviously, still majority rules, so that if someone gets 51% of the vote, then that person is the winner if they get a majority of first place votes. But it's a way to allow folks not to always have to choose the lesser of two evils, not to vote for someone they don't really support so much because they're afraid of somebody else. And I think that's really critical in our election process. As you know, Joe, I'm a big fan of people doing reforms by initiative. Let's leave the politicians to fight their squabbles, and let's go do what we can to change things directly on the ballot. But we obviously, you can't run government simply by initiative, and we need a better system that gives us better candidates. And I think there's really two steps to that. One is we have to create the agenda, and that means that the issues have to come from the public. Otherwise, we get a lot of macho flash and all kinds of mealy-mouthed sound bites that are supposed to sound good about how they believe in education or they believe in something else. We need to set an agenda from the public, and I think that can be done at the grassroots level, at the state and local level, through the initiative process. And then I think the second step is to clean up our election process. I've been very critical of the fact that 15% of the Democratic Party's delegates are super delegates, so that it is possible. It looks like Hillary Clinton will end up winning and winning a majority of the vote, but she had such a big lead among the super delegates that she could win the election or the nomination from the Democratic Party without getting a majority of the actual vote in the primaries and caucuses.
That is correct.
So that's a serious problem. And I think the other things are things like this ranked choice voting. I'm on the board of a group called Fair Vote, the Center for Voting and Democracy. And we're looking for better ways to allow people to have their vote and for that vote to count as much as it can count to get, because the whole goal is to have representatives representing us. And I think we all feel like, they're called representatives, but none of us feel that way. Even a lot of the folks that, we may have voted for because they're better than somebody else, we don't feel like they truly represent us. And I think we have to give voters better tools if we want the representative part of government to actually function.
Right. Well, for the benefit of our audience, could you explain the initiative process and what that really means? I think people intuitively think they understand what that means, but maybe if you can clarify that, it would help them during our show.
Well, sure. Really, you have three aspects of what's often called direct democracy. And I used to not like that term direct democracy because, of course, it's still checked by the courts. It's not so direct. You've got to go out and get thousands of signatures on petitions. But I've actually become more fond of that term direct democracy because I think people are so tired of all talk, no action out of politicians that I think we all kind of like the direct part. And what these three main functions or main vehicles of direct democracy are: the initiative, referendum, and recall. And the initiative is where citizens get together and say, hey, we need a new law. We need term limits. And we know the politicians are never going to vote for term limits. Let's write a term limits law. Let's go out and get the number of signatures. Some states it's as high as 15% in your home state of Oklahoma. Other states like Colorado, it's as low as 5% of the vote for governor or president, statewide officials, total statewide vote. They all have different requirements. You go out and get those signatures, you can put that term limits measure or campaign reform measure or any other measure on the ballot. 17 states have a constitutional amendment process. And I think that's really the most important because we as citizens are the boss. We have to be able to check our elected officials. And in the states that just have a statutory process, of course, the legislature can come in and monkey around with whatever voters pass. And you would think they'd have better sense than that, but no, they don't. They monkey around with what the voters do quite often. The second is referendum, and that's where if the legislature passes a law, we can put it on the ballot and say, wait a second, we want the whole public to have a chance to weigh in and decide this law. And that's a wonderful process. It's been stolen away from voters in a lot of states. In Oregon, there's an initiative right now that would require the legislature for any, a lot of times when they pass legislation, there's a little proviso that if it's an emergency, like an earthquake, some sort of catastrophic attack from the Japanese or something, you can pass a law and it's not subject to referendum. What's happened is that in Oregon, almost every law that they pass, they just call an emergency so that the voters can't have any say on it.
Right.
Same is true in Colorado. It happens around the country. And it's just another sign that we cannot trust the honesty of our elected representatives. So the referendum's a great process, but the politicians have gamed it a lot. And then the third process, which is not as widespread around the country as the other two, is recall. And I think it's always going to be used less, but it is an important factor, I think, when elected officials have completely outworn their welcome. Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, who is widely despised for very good reasons, like hiding the video of a shooting until after his reelection campaign. When someone has lost the faith of voters across the board, recall is a nice process, right. Almost a healing process.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're such enthusiastic voters, at least part of the population is, and yet if you ask these voters if you trust the politicians, if you trust the process, usually the answer is no. It seems to be a contradiction to their own behavior, and I can never understand that. Quite frankly, and I make no bones about this, unless there is someone to vote for, like a Ron Paul, for example, I don't vote. And people are under the impression, well, you have to vote, it's your obligation. And people don't understand that it's not your obligation to vote, it's your obligation to dissent. And if you dissent, then we have people in office who will represent truly the people through the precepts of the Constitution. But that's totally watered down. People don't even understand what I've just said, and it's a real problem. So people vote because they feel like they have to vote. They wind up voting for who they believe is the lesser of two evils, and we constantly have the same results, an evil situation. But there are also many different voting processes. For example, there's one in which you can vote for everyone on the ballot, but you force rank them. For example, if there's a Republican, Democrat, and let's say a Libertarian, and a person comes in, they can vote no for a Republican, yes for a Democrat, and they may vote yes for a Libertarian. Now, the next person comes in as a diehard Republican. He votes yes for the Republican. He votes no for the Democrat. But he said, Libertarians, that seems to be nice guys, I'll vote for Libertarian. Well, you add up all the votes. The Republicans get one. The Democrats get one. But the Libertarians get 2 votes. I mean, that to me is more representative of a democracy than what we have now when they're shunted out of the system altogether. And there's not statistically a snowball chance in hell of a third party ever winning.
Yes, there are parliamentary systems, and there are parliamentary systems where you actually pick the candidate. There are parliamentary systems where you pick the party. I think a lot of times Americans think, well, we're not a parliamentary system, and we've had a great deal of stability and economic growth, and we're a wonderful country because of that difference. Right. My analysis is that's not the significant difference. We came from a different place. We're the first society in human history to create our own government. The government's supposed to serve us, not the other way around. We're the sovereign, not the government, and that's a fundamentally different place. I think we've been really blessed by having oceans separating us from Asia and Europe. So we didn't get in all the constant warfare in Europe until the 20th century, and then we managed to find ourselves in it. But so I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. I think the key is to give the individual voter more choice. I might prefer a more parliamentary system, but I don't think that's so essential. I think what is essential is that someone going to the ballot box can state their preference without having to vote for one guy as if they love that guy. And I've become very, I don't know if the word is forgiving, because there was never anything not to forgive, but I know people who are going to vote for the person they believe in no matter what. They're going to vote for the Libertarian for president, even if that Libertarian candidate doesn't have any chance to win.
Right.
Because they're trying to send a message with their vote. I have a lot of respect for that. That's what I generally try to do in any race. But I also have respect for people who say, hey, I don't want this person to be the president of the United States, so I'm going to vote for their number one opponent who has the best chance to beat them. That's a more strategic vote. But we're trying to defend ourselves, and in recent elections, I've called people. I'm in Virginia. I'm in a swing state. My vote might matter. I've called people in California, Washington State, most of the states in the country, your vote for president doesn't matter because everybody knows how that state's going to go anyway. And I've said to them, I know you want, this candidate to win. If you'll vote for the Libertarian, I'll vote for this candidate. And
Right.
And I'm not alone. There's been tremendous coverage of vote trading in that way. I think it makes sense. And of course, the nice thing is I can trade, my one vote for 5 or 10 or however much time I have to pick up the phone and call friends in other states that aren't competitive. But I think there's one more thing to all of this. So I think we want better voting systems. I think we have to respect people who are trying as best they can to defend their liberties by voting however they choose to do it. But I think the key is, if you're out there listening and you want America to be a freer country, you're not going to make that happen by voting for some candidate who will do it for you. And I don't want to discourage anybody from finding candidates to run, from supporting them, working hard, voting for them. But we're going to have to do it in a much more grassroots, foundational way. We have to hem in our politicians. Our country's out of control. And just one case in point, and I happen to be very pro-peace. I'm a dove, I'm not a hawk. But you look at the situation in the Middle East today, and ISIS. ISIS is beheading people and burning people alive and finding new ways of torture. There's been a lot of people tortured before, but they managed to find some new ways to disgust people. And we've been whipped up into a frenzy about it. Everybody from Republicans to Democrats are for fighting ISIS and taking them out and making the sand glow and everything else. We haven't declared war on ISIS. Why not? One reason is because the Congress wants to give the president more power to fight the war than he says he wants. So we're sort of at war, except we're not. The Congress hasn't declared it. It's obvious the president isn't really fighting it. And to be honest with you, Joe, I don't want them to fight it because they have absolutely no plan whatsoever for how to end it and bring our people home. We're going to be in Afghanistan for decades, because if the idea is we can't leave until Afghanistan is stable and can stand on its own, my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren dying in some frag incident in some terrorist incident in Afghanistan. Yeah. I happen to think that's terrible. I think our best option is to get out of there and encourage sane Sunni Muslims or Shiites or different people to do the right thing. I hope the Kurds can develop some sort of homeland where they'll be protected against their crazy neighbors. But it's not America's fight. But even if you believe it is America's fight, we should be there, we should be doing it all. Why has there not been a single question asked of any presidential candidate? And in my common sense commentary, I've written several on this. No one has been asked, how do you get out? And I don't want to put my children or anyone else's children into a war in which there is no plan to ever get out.
Right.
And yet we have that. And you could say, well, that's one thing. Wars are difficult. But look at all the other issues. We've got a government that routinely around the country, everyone agrees it's wrong, but steals through what's called civil asset forfeiture. And the police come in and take your stuff. They don't charge you. They don't convict you. They just steal your stuff, and then you've got to hire a lawyer to get it back. Right. It violates innocent until proven guilty. It violates property rights because that's your stuff. You have a right. And yet it's not that the Republicans or the Democrats say, oh no, it's a wonderful thing. Everyone pretty much admits it's thievery. And yet there isn't the consensus in Washington or the impetus to do anything about it. Right. Almost all the issues, war and peace is tough to get at the grassroots local level, but most of the issues that bedevil us as a country, there are things we can do at the local level, at the state level, and we have to start by getting our politicians under control, some sort of ethical framework. I'm supporting an effort through Liberty Initiative Fund in Ohio to tie their legislative pay, to median household income. which to me makes perfect sense.
Right.
Because now they're tied to the people and they can't raise their own pay willy-nilly. I'm working with term limit activists in Arkansas. 2 years ago, they snookered the voters. They cheated them by not telling them what was in the measure. We tried to warn them, but it barely won. We reached probably about half the electorate. If we could have reached the other half, we could have clobbered it. But they weakened the term limits to 16 years in a single office, and they gave themselves a pay raise by establishing an independent citizens committee to decide pay. Well, who picked the citizens committee that was so independent? The legislature. So they got 150% pay raise. And here's the problem. Even today, now we're going to put this term limits measure on the ballot and we'll win. But even today, most people in Arkansas don't know about the term limits being weakened so dramatically and don't even know about the pay raise. We have a tremendous lack of knowledge at the local level about how our government's being run and what's happening. And yet we've heard every nasty comment that one politician has said to another about a presidential race that we have almost no influence over. And so I think people have to start thinking about, not that I'm a voter and, if that's all you are, you're going to vote every 4 years or every 2 years. I'm not really talking to you because you're not going to be part of the solution, not any big part. And that's too bad. I wish you would be. But I'm looking for people who want to step up and do something. And it's not easy. It's going to take, it's going to take a weekend here or there. It's going to mean that maybe you got to walk your neighborhood and gather signatures or go to the polls on election day and do more than just vote and get your little sticker. You got to go out there and be part of the real process trying to change things. Yeah. I've been very frustrated because we all get excited about the presidential race. It's fun spectacle, but there's nobody running who is capable of doing what they're claiming. There's nobody running who seems to understand that the problem, I think the guy who is tapped into the just tremendous angst, anger, frustration at the grassroots level is Donald Trump. And unfortunately, his answer is, I'm going to make America great again. I'm going to make great trade deals. I was thinking the other night, does anyone think that America became rich and prosperous because presidents ran around the world and made great trade deals? No, and when we balance the, you hear Kasich talk about balancing the budget, and Bill Clinton, I'm sure will say sometime on the campaign trail about when he balanced the budget along with Newt Gingrich. Reality is it wasn't really balanced. They used Social Security money to balance it. But the truth is Bill Gates and Steve Jobs balanced that budget. That budget was balanced because we had tremendous economic growth that came from people innovating and inventing new things and allowing people to be more productive that had absolutely nothing to do with the policies in Washington. They didn't create the dot-com expansion. They merely took advantage of it and said, look what great politicians we are.
Yeah. I have occasion to listen to on the cable channel, not a cable, but I have satellite, and I'll spend a few minutes listening to the Senate or the Congress, when they're in session or even out of session, and it's like these guys are talking to the wind. I mean, there's no one there. That they give their speech, and of course, which gets edited afterwards so they can change it for the records and whatever. And it seems to be a lot of nonsense. But what I truly enjoy is watching the House of Commons when the Prime Minister is proposing something or giving his point of view, and then every party is given an opportunity to raise their hand or even boo him, and it's not as antiseptic as it is in our institution, where when the president gets up, there's absolute silence. He says whatever he wants to say. Everyone applauds. They stand up, and he leaves, and everything is gospel. Well, in the House of Commons, which is very interesting, Cameron would get up and say something, who's the prime minister, and you'll hear people in the background going, boo, booing him, showing their disappointment, and then raising their hand, and then they get called on, and then they retort. It seems like such a much more democratic process, especially when you consider the fact that they have proportional voting, where if X number of people vote for, let's say, the Labor Party, there are so many seats dedicated to the Labor Party. That seems to be so much more representative than what we have here. In fact, we broke away to get away from that to become more representative, and we became less. Now, do you think that the British have a better system than we have?
Well, they don't have the same constitutional protections. And I think that those constitutional protections are very, very important. So I wouldn't trade our system for theirs.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, all you have to do is watch the Prime Minister's questions one time, or the House of Commons, and you see the interaction. And it's much rougher in a sense, but it's more real. And I think the more that we have a system in which different parties hold completely different ideas, not just about what should be done, but about the facts themselves, and they don't engage in the same way. And I think that allows them to hold these completely different viewpoints, and they're always talking past each other. I think it'd be great to see them engaged in those sorts of parliamentary debates that, now they get a certain amount of time and they drone on and nobody's listening.
Right.
But the interaction between opponents, I think, would be very, very valuable.
I truly enjoy watching them. I mean, it's almost fun to watch these guys saying, how does a prime minister justify what he just said based on, and they go on and on, based on this, when actually that never really occurred. In fact, it cost the populace of Britain, X number of dollars with absolutely nothing to show for it. I mean, they come out and say that. I mean, if anyone said that in our Congress to the president when he was up there, the guy would never see the light of day the next day. I mean, I find it almost refreshing to watch and fun to watch, actually.
Yes, and if you look at the dynamics of where they're standing and how they're doing it, it's a smaller room in England. There's no huge, the only time the president ever addresses the Congress, he's standing way up as the speaker. He's not taking questions. I don't know if folks have ever debated somebody, just like if you see a football game that's a hard-fought football game, at the end of the game, what do the best players on both teams do?
Yeah, they hug,
and they shake hands with the
other. Right, they hug each
player.
other, right, yeah.
Because they know they had to fight against an opponent, and they respect what the opponent brought.
Right.
And I think we'd see more cooperation if Mr. Obama and the Congress were arguing it out every once in a while on equal footing.
Absolutely. I would love to hear a congressman raise their hand, and respectfully, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about a shouting match saying, well, you mentioned that the war is going well in Afghanistan. Can you quantify that? It seems like we're losing a lot of people. We are 35 people a day are committing suicide because of post-traumatic stress syndrome. How could we lose more people in the United States killing themselves because they were there than we're losing in Afghanistan, and we're not making any progress? How do you justify that statement? I would like to hear someone say that. Ron Paul would say that if he was in Congress, but then obviously the president would not have a response. He would be absolutely embarrassed. So it's a check on what they say in the first place and what the populace hears and gets to believe.
Yes, and our check tends to be the news media, which I think is almost always, at least the National Press Corps, in the tank for the Democrats. I don't think that was always the case, but it certainly has been with Obama. Right. And I know when Bill Clinton was elected president, there was a poll that came out where they polled the National Press Corps. 92% of the National Press Corps voted for Bill Clinton. So their politics is in the mix, and it's not helping us. They're not being a watchdog, they're being a lapdog. And if you think about it, if Barack Obama had to sit and answer questions for an hour from the Congress, he would not go to the Congress and say the war is going well, because he knows he can't hold that position.
Right.
And when they started attacking him, he'd say, well, why don't you give me authorization to fight this thing? Why haven't you guys declared war? In other words, all of a sudden, a lot of their ridiculous positions and failures would be so out there in the open that they would have to change their positions.
Right.
And someone might actually ask them, Mr. President, do you ever see a scenario in which Afghanistan is going to be just rosy and our boys and girls can leave, and the same in Iraq? And if we wipe out ISIS, what happens the next day? What happens when we come home? Doesn't the same area explode into the same kind of conflict? So those sorts of questions that, frankly, I've given up hope that the media would ever ask, I think you would see in that sort of back and forth. But, part of it, too, is we need representatives who truly feel like they have to represent us. I don't mean in some phony, yes, I'm listening to the, these listening tours that Hillary Clinton has done. I'm not talking about phony crap. I'm talking about real representation. And part of the problem is we have congressmen who represent, 700,000 people? And in some states, I think Montana, it's 800,000 people. How do you represent 800,000 people? It's very difficult. The state in the country that I think has the worst legislature is California. Their average House member represents about 500,000 people. Their average senator, 1 million people. The best legislature, the most representative in the country, New Hampshire. They have 400 members in their House. The average New Hampshire House member represents 3,000 people. Now, if you're a New Hampshire House member and you have 5 constituents call you and say, I've got a problem with this bill, or I really think this reform is a great one, we need to pass it, you better listen, because otherwise you may be out. In California, if you get 50 or 500 calls,
it's nothing.
You just ignore them.
Yeah. They should be representing not the people, they should be representing the precepts of the Constitution, which protects the people from the government. And that's what they should be doing. The politicians should be the stopgap to make certain that no one, whether it be a citizen, whether it be a politician or otherwise, or anyone, or even a foreign entity, if they trample on the rights of the people as delineated in the Constitution, that's what our elected officials are for. They're not doing that. They're making their own rules up, bypassing the Constitution, and then trying to justify it to the people. And that's why I think this whole cacophony is totally out of control and could never be corrected until we correct the mindset of the people. Last week I gave a little talk, and people would say that because the politicians are saying in the early stages of the debate that the number one problem of America is ISIS. The number one threat to America is ISIS. And I said, no, it's not. It's not ISIS. It's the government. And then I changed my mind. I said, no, I'm wrong. It's not the government. It's the people that's the number one problem with America. The number one crisis that we have is the way people think. And the way they think, their mentality is every place from when they first went to school and went to government schools and taught the government way of thinking, which is don't think at all, just listen and obey and keep your mouth shut, to today, these people are now voting exactly the way they've been taught in school. Their mentality is so low, as far as I'm concerned, the mentality quotient is so low that they cannot think critically. And if you think critically, you're considered a conspiracy theorist, a radical, or a nutcake, somebody that's hates America, whatever the case may be. And it's really the people of America that vote in these people because they're not objecting. Which brings me to my I'm going to have a question after that, but we're a little late. I just got notification that we should have had our station identification, and they're going to start beating me over the head with a baseball bat. Paul, could you hold on for about 60 seconds so we can break for station identification, and we'll be right back?
Love to do it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Folks, don't go away. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Stay with us, please.
Joe, Christy, Cristiano, LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site
Hey, Joe,
occupational
you hear
health
me?
testing services. That's right. We said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com.
Ranch Acres Audiology is about caring, about getting the most out of life, about personal attention.
Sometimes helping someone with their hearing is really helping them with more than just hearing. That's the goal of my practice. That's what my goal has been for 20 years.
You're invited to attend our next free Lunch and Learn seminar. Call us today, 918-749-7711.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm Joe Cristiano, your host, and with us today we have a person who has been on our program a few times before, and we hope he continues to come back and inform us as to what is going on and educate us about how we should think and what we should do to preserve our freedom, which we are losing by the minute, by the way, in this country. And his name is Paul Jacobs, one of my favorites. And by the way, he is the president of Citizens in Charge. He writes a column called Common Sense, which I read almost every day. That's one thing I try never to miss, by the way, Paul. I love your writings, and he's an exquisite writer. He gets right to the point, and it's interesting and fun to read. And in the interest of full disclosure, I am also a financial supporter of his organization. You know, I donate to it on a regular basis because I truly believe in what he is doing and what he does. I can never pay in enough to pay back to pay him for all he does for us, and I suggest that you do the same. But during our live, would you put up the banner up for the cell phone call, please? During our live broadcast, if you would call in 646-652-4620, that's 646-652-4620, with any questions or comments that you may have, pro, con, or whatever. And even if you just want to mouth off, we'd love to hear from you anyway. Paul, thank you very much for holding on while we went through all that, the commercials and whatever. And we are having a little trouble with our board today, so we're fidgeting around a little bit. Paul, here's a question. What is your opinion of having a ballot that has the Republican, the Democrat, the Independent, the Liberal, the Libertarian, or whatever party it is, especially Libertarian? They should be on. They're going to be on every ballot, I think, this year on all 49 or 50 states. But the last column says none of the above. What do you think of that?
I like the idea of none of the above. I think that it won't be as useful as some other things. Like, when I think of different reforms, I think going to a ranked choice voting system is a much more robust reform. Right. I think term limits. I'm big on, we need to reduce pay for legislators, and we need to control their pensions. Being a legislator ought not get you a pension. We need people in public office who are not doing it to further their own career. And you made, I think, a really good point that we're kind of taught in school that our role is to vote to choose our leaders. But that's not right. First of all, our role, as we've already discussed, is a lot bigger than that. But it's not just about picking our leaders. We as the citizens are the leaders. We're picking our servants.
That's correct.
We're picking people who work for us and are represented by us. And you can see that that's not the case. They go to Washington, and they're not looking for ways to strengthen the Constitution so that the government never gets too powerful and starts to impinge on our freedoms. They're looking actively for ways to get around the Constitution. They are part of the government. If you read the decision in the U.S. term limits versus Thornton case, where 5-4 they struck down the state-imposed term limits on Congress, they talked about how these are federal representatives and they work for the federal government. We need representatives in Washington who I think are paid, their pay and their benefits are decided by the voters of their state, by the voters of their district. We've got to do things to reconnect folks with the people, and reconnect the people with legislators, because the whole system works if our representatives truly represent us. But we all know that's not the case. They've been bought off special interests. They've been bought off mostly by their own lust for power. And that's not because, we elected bad people who lust for power. Good people put in positions where power is dangled before them every few seconds are not going to last very long on the whole. And so we need ways to stop that. And I used to be a big believer that, it's not how much they make. People get upset about a pay raise, and usually the way they do it is obnoxious. But who's going to argue that they should make a little bit more money here or there? Well, now I come to tell you, I'll argue that they shouldn't make a little bit more money here or there. They shouldn't have a pension. I think we're going to get better representatives who feel closer to the people if their service is a sacrifice of some degree. I'm not looking for them to make nothing. I'm not looking for them to be, punished in some way. Just do not make being a representative a lucrative job, or you have destroyed the very basis of that job, which is to be in sync with the people that you're representing.
Well, even if we changed all of that, we modified, revised it all, made it fair, reduced eliminated the pensions, reduced their pay, even had term limits, one term only, and then you go home to your job again, whatever, which I'm an advocate of. You serve one term, not two, and that's it, because in Congress it's 2 years, only because originally it was intended for a farmer, for example, to serve temporarily by going to Washington, representing his district, and then going back on his farm. And he couldn't afford to do any more than that maybe go to Washington a couple of times during the year, or maybe at least once a year for 2 years. But then he went back to his business. So it was never intended for them to be career politicians. But now they go there and they exist there forever. But even if we corrected all of that, even if we brought it back to we become minimalist in legislature, we still have K Street to worry about, because these are the guys with all the money. These are all the lobbyists, the billions and billions of dollars that are being funneled through. Isn't there some way we have to dissolve K Street, do away with it, move it over to maybe Siberia and never see it again?
Well, you always have these proposals that we should outlaw lobbying, or we should put all kinds of restrictions on lobbyists. The problem is none of those. First of all, you can't outlaw lobbying, right, because that's fundamental First Amendment activity, and I don't think you even want to. Nor do all these restrictions work, because what they tend to do, just like in every other industry, is the more regulations you have, the more the wealthier interests are able to jump over all those hurdles, and folks who don't have as much wherewithal are stopped by all those hurdles. But I think what you can do is change the whole nature of government. When Congress passes laws that create these huge regulatory agencies, it makes it to where now all the lobbying has to take place to try to control what they're doing to your business. People have this tendency to think, well, the big special interests go to Congress and try to get special favors. But I always point out two cases, both Walmart and Microsoft, huge companies, before the federal government was trying to beat up, through the Department of Justice, beat up Microsoft because it was a monopoly, even though Linux, a few years later started to eat their lunch, proving that, of course, they weren't a monopoly.
Right.
But before that, Microsoft spent $47,000 on lobbying nationwide and in Congress. That was what they spent. That's a pittance.
That's nothing. That's a nothing burger, as they say.
Yeah,
nothing burger.
After all that, of course, they were spending millions on lobbying and so on. And so what happens, and of course the Congress, they should be fixing the tax code. And every time there's a presidential election, every Republican has some fix for the tax code.
Right.
But folks know, and Steve Forbes, to his credit, pointed this out when he ran for president a long time ago. We need term limits and we need a flat tax, he said, because every time Congress takes out the tax code, everybody in America who has money takes out their checkbook to write a check, because through that tax code, they can sure control a lot of stuff. We've got to create a government where we set broad, fair rules and laws, and then stop all this, oh, well, we have a 400-page thing that only the best lawyers in the world could figure out, and therefore you better come with your lobbyist and pay this money and make this campaign contribution. In other words, the less power, especially the less arbitrary power that Congress has, and that the administration has, and that the bureaucracy has, the less that these special interests can play.
Yeah.
And if we had a flat tax across the board for businesses too, and GE couldn't do all the different things they do with their accountants, well, then they pay the same tax rate as Moe's barbershop down the street. And isn't that the way it should be? So really, we can solve a lot of these special interest problems by having a government that works for everybody and stops trying to, do so many intricate things that turn out to be intricate special deals for special people who are well connected.
It's a shame that Ron Paul was almost vilified so often. Because they called him Dr. No, because and his explanation was easy. He says, well, when someone gives me 1,170 pages of legalese documents, that I have to vote on, and I'm given 14 hours, to digest all of that, of which I'd probably take years to digest it, because it's always legalese references to other legalese documents, which would require a whole staff of research. And I'm expected to vote the next day because someone gave me a 25-word summary, and that's what I'm voting on, but I really don't know what it says. I vote no. And he made perfect sense. And people say, oh, no, he's not, he doesn't care, And it's just like that the mentality of the people is just so poor. Do you think people will be rallying around someone like Ron Paul because he's representing the people? And an injunction to that is during the debates, what I heard over and over again is a candidate saying, I have a plan, and this plan is to propose a program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They all have programs for this, programs for that. Never did you hear, or rarely did you hear saying, I have no plan. I want to give it back to the people, reduce the legislation, and have the people decide for themselves. The government should not be involved. You hardly heard that. And if a person said that, people would be frightened, like, I have to make a decision for myself? I can't do that. I need an elected official to do that, a strong one, so I'm going to vote for the person who's going to restrict my rights the most. This is the way it came out. And am I thinking wrong, or is this the same flavor that you received?
No, I think you're onto something, because, it seems to me that we want, the more that government does for us, and the more we have some leader who we decide on with rotten choices and then leave everything to them, well, we're just like the child who was never given any opportunity to do things on their own.
Right.
They get to a certain age and they can't make decisions for themselves,
right,
because they never had that opportunity. On the other hand, if we have a system in which the voters do matter, I have absolutely no doubt voters will rise to the occasion. But it's a matter of maturing our democracy, or treating democracy like something kids do. You get a vote and then get out of here. We adults are going to make all the decisions. And, we have that sort of system. I also think, a lot of times you and I have a philosophy. We're libertarians. We have a way in which we kind of see things. And libertarians, of course, can disagree on specific issues, but we're coming from a standpoint that we think there ought to be maximum freedom.
Right.
But our analysis of what's wrong with the current situation is not so much different from the analysis you might get from the left or from the conservative right or anywhere on the spectrum, because you don't have to believe everything we believe to know it stinks. Something is rotten in Washington. When there is a bill like Obamacare, now President Obama campaigned, remember how he talked about we'll do everything out in the open?
Right.
That we ought to, it ought to be on television. Well, it could have been, Why wasn't it? Because if it was on television, they would have to own up to their own positions. And when a bill as important as Obamacare is dumped and it's 3,000 pages long, and the truth is, I've read parts of it, you need a lawyer just to read it.
Right.
We have representatives voting yay or nay on it. They don't know what's in it. This is like driving 100 miles an hour down the highway looking the other way.
Right.
We're asleep at the switch, and I think we see that in foreign policy. We see it in domestic policy. We can't succeed if that's the system that we have, and it is. We see it again and again. That wasn't a one-time, that one bill because of politics got that way. They're doing that all the time. They don't budget in a normal way. They have a budgeting that assumes the government's going to grow by 5 and 7% every year. It's one pretend after a lie, and then let's pretend some more. Then we're going to lie, and we all know it. We know it. There's no honest, thoughtful, knowledgeable person who's going to fundamentally disagree with what I just said.
Yeah.
And so, what do you do about it? Well, we can vote for someone who's going to make America great, or we can vote for Hillary Clinton because she really cares about us. We can go in along with the pretense, or we can think and say, do I really care about this? Do I just want to hear someone drone on and maybe drone on in really nice, exciting ways? Because my droning is really good and no one gets exploded in it. So, but it's the kind of thing. Is that what we're doing? Is this entertainment? Because if it's entertainment, it's working. It's scary. It's kind of a horror show at times, but it's entertainment. It's working. If it's governance, if it's about the future of us and our kids and our grandkids, it's not working. It's not working at all.
Right.
And I think people have to decide, do I care enough to do more than, watch a debate and decide how I'm going to vote? You got to do more. We can't save the country. There's nobody on the dais who is going to save the country. It has to be a grassroots movement. It has to be people talking together. And frankly, as much as I'm a libertarian and my solutions are going to fit that model, it's got to be Democrats and conservatives and Republicans and liberals and progressives. It's got to be people working together. And what I think that argues for is, let's find some of the issues that we all agree on, and let's start reforming government. And once we start, I think it changes everything, because it changes the agenda. The agenda isn't set by the TV networks or by national politicians or political parties. It's set by us, because we're talking about different issues that are on our ballots. It changes the whole nature of who runs for office and how they run for office. When we were doing term limits in the 90s and sweeping the country, it wasn't an accident that Republicans picked up on it. Newt Gingrich and other people in Congress, they hated the idea, but they realized they couldn't nationalize the campaign without making it part of their contract for America, because so many people had decided to run for office on that momentum. We have to do it. You and I and other people, the guy who's driving the taxi, the person who's working at the medical clinic, the small business owner, we've got to find enough time and look at what Bernie Sanders has done. I'm not a socialist. I think that's exactly the wrong direction. Everything being free just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Somebody somewhere might have to pay a tax, but he's getting small contributions. People are stepping up. This idea that there's nothing you can do is a sorry excuse. And we've got to step up and do things. And it's there. There are states that have the initiative process statewide. There's states that have it at the local level. I guarantee you, if you want a better local government, put a couple reforms on the ballot. Put one to start and see what happens, and see how politicians react. I guarantee you put term limits on your local city council that hasn't had it before, and it's going to change the whole nature of politics.
Right.
Go after some of these criminal justice things that are outrageous, like civil asset forfeiture, and see if it doesn't create some new lines where people can discuss issues, where you see the right and the left coming together.
Yeah. Are there any of the mainstream candidates that you feel are better than the other, or are you putting them all in the same camp? Is there anyone that you would actually consider voting for, and why?
I would, I'm not above strategic voting, so I could see voting for someone to stop someone else who's worse from getting elected. I think the way things stand, this may be, if it's a Trump Hillary Clinton election, it may be the easiest vote for a libertarian that anyone could ever cast. And I say that I don't see Trump as the great boogeyman, and as I think all the Nazi references and different things go way over the top. I think he said some incredibly stupid, wrong, and divisive, and just almost violence inciting things.
Right.
It's stupid to say, I wish I could punch somebody in the face. You're running for president of the United States. That's stupid to say in a bar with your buddies.
Right.
It's really stupid to say before 30,000 people when you're running for president. However, he didn't create the problem at his rallies. He didn't, in other words, this is a two-way street, and I see the media all of a sudden, he's all these riots or fights are his fault. Well, you send people into a thing, a speech by someone else that they're trying to shut down, and then they start throwing punches at people, and somehow that's the fault of the guy who's speaking. I don't think so. So I don't want to make him a big boogeyman, but I don't think he has a plan to fix the country. And I think his attitude is that the president kind of runs America like a CEO, and that is the antithesis of what created America. That is the absolute antithesis. So I have a real problem there. Hillary Clinton, if I liked your policies, I can't imagine wanting to go back to that soap opera. It's not a good show. It's tedious. I still think that she needs to get arrested for the $100,000 bribe she took through cattle futures trading. I got real problems with the fact that I don't think she's honest. I think she's a crook. That's not a nice thing to say, but I just have to be honest. That's my thought. And so I look at those two and I think this is absolutely outrageous. And the only real difference is that Hillary Clinton is really representing the status quo in people's minds, and Donald Trump is representing people who are absolutely livid with the status quo. And that creates a certain amount of sympathy, not so much for Donald Trump, but for his voters. Yeah. Because, I don't like the one who slugged somebody. That guy's not that guy needs to be prosecuted, and whatever happens. He served his time. But I think most Donald Trump people have not thrown a punch at anybody. They're good Americans and good people, and so I do have a certain sympathy for them. I just think, again, we're going to be, this is a pivotal election, and we're given choices that really don't have much opportunity to end up in a good place for us. Yeah,
we're almost out of time, but I wanted to bring this one subject up, and I'd hate myself if I didn't, even if we went overtime. I think we're going to get a little overtime, Hervey. I just saw a board operator. I think we're going to go overtime. But is that the Libertarian Party has been given absolutely no press whatsoever, no mention whatsoever. And it seems that they've taken a very passive approach this year for this election. And here we are well within, the election process, and not a word from mainstream media, from alternate media, no one as to who's running, who the candidates are. We're going to have them on our program, every one of them, all the ones that will, shake out and be contesting against one another. But they are transparent to this whole process, and they hold the answers to many of the problems that we're having today, unlike the Hillary Clintons, who say that America's great and she's going to bring everyone together and everyone's going to prosper. Yay! So they have real answers, and the American public is not being given the opportunity, especially since they have who's the governor of New Mexico?
Gary Johnson.
Gary Johnson. I'm sorry, my brain went silent for a second. It's happening more often, by the way. But Gary Johnson, I mean, so he's a notable figure, and yet I haven't heard much about him, and it just discourages me. But maybe the 42% of the people who are not, and I heard this figure from somewhere, I have not verified it, but like 42% of the people are not registered Republicans or Democrats. I'm just hoping that those 42 people come out of the woodwork and vote for Libertarian, and maybe we'll have at least a showing, towards the mature part of this campaign.
Well, if people are given enough information about an alternative, and the Republican is Trump and the Democrat is Hillary Clinton, I think that alternative is going to do very, very well. Now, there was a lot of press. The press seems to just completely fixate on horse race politics. Even when they interview the candidates, instead of asking tough questions about their principles or their policies, they ask them horse race questions.
Right.
And I'm thinking, these guys aren't the campaign manager. What do they know about how they should run this or how they're going to do next week?
Right.
They're all supposed to be pundits instead of people who are leading a charge for a certain change. And so that I find outrageous. And then, of course, they're the Washington Beltway, they're New York. Mayor Bloomberg, there was all kinds of talk about him running. And I had several friends who said, what do you think about Mayor Bloomberg getting in? I said, he's not going to get in, because the second he gets in, people are going to realize he has no following whatsoever.
Right.
He spent more money to get reelected in New York for his third term, which of course he pledged to not run more than twice.
That's right, yeah.
He screwed over the voters on the term limits law, and he had a sacrificial lamb challenger, and he barely won. The most, I believe, ever spent, I think it was $300 some odd per vote that he spent because of what he did to term limits. And it shows that people care about issues. They're not in love with Michael Bloomberg. They're not in love with any of these politicians. That's a pretend game being played by politicians and media folks. But so I think if there is an opportunity for people to hear about Gary Johnson, I think John McAfee, who started the McAfee software, he's a little bit out there in some ways, maybe a little more exciting or racy than a lot of people are going to like. But it's interesting that he's running as a libertarian. It's interesting years ago that the former Alaska Senator Mike Gravel,
I know Mike, yes.
And he was beaten by Bob Barr, who was a Republican congressman, who I kind of jokingly said was on an apology tour because he was apologizing for his Defense of Marriage Act. Right. He apologized for the drug war. But the reason that's the case is because libertarians have a line on the ballot. The hard work at the grassroots has given libertarians a leg up because we've done the work to get on the ballot all these places. Right. So right now, if you want to run for president and you're going to start a campaign to run as an independent, you're going to have a heck of a time getting on all these state ballots.
Oh, yes, it's nearly impossible. That's why McAfee decided to become libertarian, because he realized that he was on our show, and he realized that his cyber party really they didn't have the time nor the support to have the cyber party registered in every state of the union for him to have a crack at becoming president. So he then went over to the Libertarian Party, and apparently they interviewed him. Paul, we are well over time. I'm getting bows and arrows thrown at me from the board operator here, so he's telling me that we're over time. And so let me give you the last 30 seconds or so to wrap things up and tell our listeners about your organization and how you may be reached if you'd like.
Well, I'm the president of Liberty Initiative Fund. That's Liberty I Fund. Emphasis on I, and that doesn't mean I fund it all. Everyone out there is an I as well. And we're looking for people to get involved and do things at the grassroots. We help people petition reforms onto the ballot, change the law, change the way government works at the state and local level. I also am president of the Citizens in Charge Foundation. We work to protect that initiative process. And I think if you're looking for this same thing with a little bit of entertainment thrown in, I mean, I've been down on political entertainment, but I'm talking about political entertainment that's a horror show. Common Sense is a little bit more funny, maybe dramatic, but no horror whatsoever. And that's at thisiscommonsense.com. I encourage you to come there. Every day there's a new commentary. There are memes and graphics that if you're on Facebook or Google Plus or whatever new thing they've come up with today, you can use those. That's thisiscommonsense.com. And Joe, what you're doing to reach people and give them some of these new ideas and ways that we can help our country, my hat's off to you. And really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Thank you so much for those words. And Paul, you can always let me know if there's anything we can do for you and your organization. Be more than happy to help out. I want to thank you so much for being on our program, and I hope you will accept that invitation to return at a later date. Okay, Paul, thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.